Aloha, social scientists. This lecture is going to focus and highlight the difference between the inductive and deductive research approaches. Similar to the previous lecture that highlighted the differences between qualitative and quantitative approaches, induction and deduction are foundational and key to understanding how, why, and when a researcher would choose a particular approach to answer their specific research question. There won't be an outline for this lecture because I'm only going to focus on inductive and deductive approaches in that order. Your assigned reading for this week covered a lot of material and a lot of concepts that are all important to understanding the foundations and tools of social research. However, I want to pay particular attention to the concepts of induction and deduction and elaborate on them a bit. When thinking about what makes an approach inductive, starting with an understanding of induction is helpful. So induction refers to a process where the researcher or the researchers begin with evidence or observations and data that will then be used to formulate or reformulate an idea. So this particular approach makes sense when there is an area that is understudied or is relatively new to a particular discipline. And this could be any of the disciplines in the social sciences. So one of the goals and the aims of inductive research is to generate concepts and to also generate new theory. And this is why it is appropriate methodologically when a researcher is focusing on an area that is relatively new and or understudied, because typically there isn't going to be a lot of research. There's not going to be a lot of concepts or a lot of theory that directly relate to that particular topic or that particular phenomena. So an example of this, and when it would be appropriate to take an inductive approach to a research question, would be if you were interested in looking at the extent that the increase in first-generation college students in West Oahu, so on this side of the island, not just the campus, affects the local economy or the job market. And the reason that an inductive approach would be appropriate for this particular question is because there's not a lot of evidence that exists or data that exists on this particular region of Oahu that relates to college graduates, because we're looking at first-generation college graduates. So this is an example of an area that is understudied. It's more contemporary, and we don't have a lot of data on it yet, so taking an inductive approach is appropriate. This slide lays out another way that we can visualize and think about what the inductive approach looks like based on the information from the chapter this week. So induction is beginning with observations, as you see at the top, and once the observations, which will then become your data, are collected, we move to the stage where this data is analyzed and the determination of whether or not there is an association or a correlation or causation is present. This then will lead us to the generation of theory, which are typically new theories or revised theories, because inductive research is looking at new and understudied areas. And this will eventually lead to developing a hypothesis that could then be tested in a subsequent study or subsequent research. Deduction, as opposed to induction, is referring to a process in social research where the researcher or researchers are beginning with established theories and knowledge that they then use to develop a set of expectations, which is also known as a hypothesis or hypotheses if there are several. And these hypotheses, the expectations of the researcher, are specific to the observations or data that will be collected. So whereas induction and inductive research approaches are most appropriate for areas that are relatively new or understudied within a discipline, deduction is the go-to for areas where there is an established literature. So this would mean that there are social theories developed and a particular trend or area, relationship between variables has been studied and documented extensively. So deductive research uses theory that already exists to generate concepts and also to test concepts and hypotheses. Deductive research tends to be quantitative, while inductive research tends to be qualitative. And this is because deductive research is most commonly seen and used in areas that have already established a foundation of knowledge and ideas and theories and concepts. So an example of this would be the hypothesis that you see in America, industrial workers vote less than white-collar workers. So this is actually a pattern that has been established time and time again, especially within the area and discipline of political science when looking at voting patterns and trends in voter turnout. So there are a lot of theories and ideas that can explain why it would be that industrial workers or blue-collar workers vote less than white-collar workers. And one of the findings typically tends to be that the key difference in explaining this is not caring about your election results or caring about your community or the policies that affect you, but it has more to do with availability and time. And this is something that we know that white collar workers, so this would be professionals, have a lot more of and a lot more time to do things like vote, read legislation, read propositions, read bills, kind of keep more informed, and then also to go wait in line. And this is especially relevant in states that don't have ballot systems in place where you can drop them off or early voting. And so white collar workers have a lot more time and availability than industrial workers or blue collar workers do. So we may be interested in testing to see if this hypothesis holds true for the state of Hawaii. The state of Hawaii, interestingly, has the lowest voter turnout in the entire United States, and it has pretty consistently held that spot as the state that has the lowest voter turnout, not just in general elections, so this would be when there's a presidential campaign and election going on that cycle, but also in midterms and local elections. So this would be something that we could test to see if it's relevant to the state of Hawaii, if it varies by island, or other demographic variables. Here is a flowchart of the deductive approach, similar to the way that the inductive approach was laid out in this format as well. So the starting point with the deductive approach and taking this methodological path in social research begins with theory. This is the key difference to keeping track of and understanding the difference between induction and deduction is what is the starting point. And with deductive research, the starting point is with theory that is existing and has already been well established. From this theory, a researcher will develop a hypothesis to then test the theory or theories. So this will, of course, involve collecting and analyzing data and observations, which will then be analyzed systematically, and the researcher can then confirm, reject, or modify the theory that they began with. So this is just another way to visualize and understand the way that the inductive and deductive approaches, what they look like in real life, in real practice. And as you'll see on the next slide, that the inductive and deductive approaches are very much interrelated, and that the key difference is where is the researcher starting, right? So keep that in mind, that the starting point is going to help you identify whether a researcher, whether that's you or an article that you're reading, is utilizing induction versus deduction.